All right, so in this video, let's take a look at finally rendering this out. Now, the way we're going to render this is a little bit unconventional. And if you've rendered something in Blender before, it's probably going to be a little bit different. But the way that we would normally render something in Blender is by going up to render in the top left and selecting render image. Now, the reason we're not going to do that is because I was kind of lazy and I like to set up my environment lights using this viewport shading option, right? Like we had seen in the previous video, we had gone and used this HDRI to provide a base for the light in our scene. However, this is just strictly viewport shading. So if I was to go and render this the conventional way, it would then default to this scene world and we would lose all of that lighting. Now, it might not make too much of a difference for your tire or this render, but just for accuracy's sake, I want to make sure that I'm showing you how to get this HDRI in your final render. So instead of doing a traditional render, what we're going to do is go up to View and do a viewport render. And Eevee makes this really nice because we can just get a really good result in the viewport and render exactly that. We don't need to fudge around with any of the lights or the dynamic environment maps. It's kind of a what you see is what you get scenario. However, if I select this, you'll see that it'll render it out and it will look exactly like how it did in our viewport, except that also comes with the caveat of it looking exactly like it did in our viewport, right? We're going to have these lights, we're going to have the axes in the middle of our tire, and we're going to want to get rid of those before we do just a viewport render. So it's very easy to do that. Just come on up to the top header here of your 3D viewport and uncheck this Show Overlays, and that'll get rid of everything there. I also want to come on over to our output here, our camera, and here's where we can change the actual resolution of the final render. Now you can go and play around with the X and Y resolution for our camera here if you wanted to get something, a little bit different aspect ratio, or size-wise if you wanted to get a higher resolution image. However, I like sticking with that 16:9 aspect ratio. And instead, what I can do to increase the overall resolution while maintaining that is I can select this percentage slider. So I can drop this down to something like 50%, and it's going to effectively reduce both of these numbers by half, but I don't have to change those sliders. And I can also go and increase that. If I bump this up to 200, now it's going to be twice the resolution of these pixel values here. So it's a little bit easier to use this percentage slider than it is to try and remember the math for each one of these values here. So I generally just stick with that percentage slider. Now, once we have that and our viewport is looking good, come on back up to the viewport render image. And that should render out exactly what we see in our viewport. And we're still getting that ambient light from that HDRI image. Finally, to go ahead and save this, go on up to Image, Save As, and then you'll be able to store this wherever you'd like to save your final render.